Right. Well, Jake, do you think we should get started and then we'll just let people trickle in as they
Let's
come?
go for it.
Okay. So welcome everyone to another Friends from the Field webinar. This is a series that's co-hosted by Blue Hill Heritage Trust and Island Heritage Trust. And if you're new, we've been doing this series since last April, and we have all the recordings from our previous webinars on both of our respective websites if you'd like to check them out. If you're just joining and you'd like to put your name and where you're from in the chat box, that would be wonderful. And I'm going to pass it over to Jake for a second to do technology, and then I'll introduce Grayson.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight. And I just want to highlight a couple of features for us tonight. The chat box is in the center bottom of your screen. Feel free to ask your questions there. Let us know who you are, where you're tuning in from, like we said before. And you can ask your questions throughout the presentation, but we'll save the question portion with Grayson at the end, like last 10 or 5 minutes or so. And at the end of the presentation, there'll also be an option to raise your hand, at which point Lander can give you the option to ask Grayson your question directly. And other than that, I'm going to hand it back over to Lander for our formal introduction.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. So we're so excited to have Grayson Richmond from Birdsacre here with us this evening for a wonderful presentation. He is the caretaker of Birdsacre. He spends his days and some nights working with and observing the vultures, the hawks, the owls at the Stanwood Wildlife Sanctuary in Ellsworth. And we're really excited to hear all about it from him tonight. Thank you, Grayson, so much for being here.
Well, hats off to you guys for doing this wonderful series, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to share some of these insights and into empowering ambassadors through behavior. Disclaimer, this is my first PowerPoint show, so I'm kind of more used to the old slide projectors, but moving along. Behavior matters. How it empowers avian ambassadors at Birdsacre is a means of communicating and understanding with another species. And the goal here is to foster comfort and empower the avian ambassadors that live at Birdsacre with choice through positive reinforcement, slowly, subtly shaping the behaviors that we want to build a relationship of trust, that results in an active, productive partnership. Positive reinforcement is really cool. It's enlightening, incredibly rewarding and beneficial, and maybe obvious, but it's definitely tricky, and it can be very impactful, not just to the birds, but at home to your cats and dogs and the people in your lives. It has a wide-ranging ability to improve your relationships. And a few terms, we're probably familiar, and who wouldn't want to have positive reinforcement, but the scientific definitions of these, reinforcement is something that is likely to increase a reoccurrence, whereas punishment would decrease that reoccurrence. Positive reinforcement will give you something that is desirable, and negative reinforcement takes away something that's undesirable, sort of like a car alarm going off. When it stops, you buckle up your belt and it stops, and that makes you happy. Whereas getting something that you really want, like a cake or an ice cream, is also a reward. Whereas punishment, positive punishment, going down the list is reducing good training, learning capabilities. So you're giving something that's undesirable, like a speeding ticket. A negative punishment is taking away something that you do want, which is not very good to be able to create a positive relationship. And here's the homes of the sanctuary where the birds live, which is it's their sanctuary, and once home to Cordelia J. Stanwood, where you can come and visit and go off into the woods and experience and learn about nature as she did. And here's one of the avian ambassadors. You're probably not as familiar seeing this up close picture of him. He's very pretty, but he's often hiding up in the upper corner of his enclosure, which is a natural behavior for owls to want to try to camouflage and disappear during the daytime. But in the overcast days or in the evenings, will come down and explore his enclosure. So he's moving around quite a bit. One afternoon, I see all these really interesting moments, which I'm not able to capture. I wish I had a GoPro or something, but things happen so quickly. And when you're around the enclosure so much with the birds, one afternoon, some titmice came through, and they all of a sudden discovered this owl sitting there, so they scolded him, called alarm to him, and he's just doing what he does, sitting there. But you see a very calm ambassador right now, sort of fluffed up, but not overly concerned. And this owl is very easily seen over at the sanctuary. And it's kind of a nice picture because, he's not looking at the photographer. He's comfortable enough to take his eyes off. The feather tufts are layered down. His chin feathers are up a little bit, so he's sort of, propped up on his chin, and very comfortable. And it's kind of curious that when folks come here, they love to hoot at the owls, and some sort of, as if people are crying out for communication. But hooting can be territorial for the owl, claiming his space. So are we challenging his space when we hoot? We don't often go up to the hawk enclosure and make a hawk call, or a vulture hiss, or go down to the duck pond. Some people go down and quack at the ducks, but it's interesting how we hoot at the owls. And are we hooting appropriately or well? Something I encourage, since they get hooted at so much, is when you see the owl, maybe turn sideways. Don't stare directly at him, and you can lower your head down for a second. And this is an owl bow. You're taking your eyes off, so you're not creating a staring contest, a challenge to him. And in the wild, if two pairs were going to, or a pair was going to meet, they may call. But when they approach, one owl will droop his head down in an owl bow. And that is a signal to the other owl to approach him, that I'm not threatening to you, I'm not challenging. And then they will start to alloprene if they like each other, scratch each other's beaks just between the eyes at the top of the beak. So owl bowing might be just a nice way to not be staring at them constantly, to make them feel more comfortable with you around. But it also gives you something to interact with them. If you want to attract something, take your eyes off it, and it becomes curious of you. And here's more of the gang. We're not just owls, but we have some wonderful other species, and they're all just incredible personalities. Now, Birdsacre's mission, impossible, is to foster a greater appreciation and sensitivity to nature, inspired by Cordelia J. Stanwood's contributions to ornithology. She would love what's going on here today. The role of the ambassadors is to encourage conservation through education, to inspire us to be better stewards, as our behaviors greatly impact our world for us and for them. So that, it's kind of a two-part thing. If we do well for ourselves, we're helping them. And if we do well for them, we're really helping ourselves as well. And this starts with, learning about the species, how to help, and when not to. Because that's often, we want to help, but we may get into trouble by trying to. These birds are required to, for their permit, do 22 programs a year to explain their their environmental niche, their ecology, natural history, but also to kind of connect to you. We love these owls. The little saw-whet up in the corner, the little gentleman, even with a camera staring at him, he's pretty cool, which is a natural defense posture to become very quiet and still. But that's how he earned his little name. And so they will go out to, the best ones can go out to travel and do educational programs. This is back in the 70s, maybe 1980. It's my grandfather, and he's working with a saw-whet owl named Buttons, who traveled with him everywhere. And back at that time, working with little owls, you would desensitize them, acclimate them to your presence. So his hand kind of slides up towards the owl, and the owl's being very still. But he's gotten comfortable to this person's behaviors, and so then they kind of understand each other, have a relationship, and Chandler can go out and speak to people about saw-whet owls. He has an injury, so he's non-releasable. That's all the educational birds are. But there's a little trouble with desensitization. It can take away, or it may not provide a voice or choice. Basically, you're just trying to do what we want and be comfortable in doing it. But it doesn't create that partnership or interaction, which can be really exciting. And Ollie, these two little owls, Buttons and Ollie here, were with my grandfather for at least a decade or two. Barred owls live longer than saw-whets. And this is one of the favorite behaviors my grandfather had working with Ollie. He would stick his finger in the owl's beak to show that there isn't a lot of pressure in the beak. We're maybe naturally hesitant about the beak, but there's not a lot of power there. The tip is sharp, so it can poke through skin and draw blood. But if you just slide it back, and Ollie was very comfortable. Unfortunately, Ollie was an imprint. He came to us as a young bird and had already kind of bonded on a person who had found him. And imprints are easily workable with people because they're already comfortable with people. The three ways that you have wild creatures can be having them desensitized, tamed, and taming or training requires constant reinforcement. You can have a habituated animal who's familiar with what you do, but not totally comfortable with you being too close or doing new things. And then you have the imprint who just doesn't care and really wants your interaction. So Ollie spent more time out of his enclosure than in it. And when he was around other owls, you could just tell by the way he looked, he was in disdain or thought himself better or completely indifferent to these other feathery things around him. So malprints, everybody imprints on somebody. That's how we grow up. That's what happened to Tarzan. But if you separate a baby during its developmental stage before it hits its fear response, it will bond on something else. And that's what happened to Mr. Gauch here, like Ollie the barred owl. Gauch the black vulture bonded on the rehabilitators who were working with him. And now he thinks he's a person. And so this can be a double-edged sword. While he's easily willing to approach you, he's not entirely without trust concerns. Even though he thinks he's a person, he still acts like a vulture. And you can see how I'm holding my hand up and he's sticking his beak into my hand, trying to simulate his mother feeding him as a baby. So he's sort of stuck in this position. Yet, imprints can have this funny other little side because they're gonna grow up physically. And even though he's 14, he still acts a little young, but he is gonna he's probably already hit his sexual maturity. So when he looks for a mate and he thinks he's a person, he's going to have a favorite. Usually it's in the springtime. And this can cause a little bit of confusion for them because they act like vultures and we're not sure why they are getting a little excited at certain points. And, Gauch can, suddenly you'll have the imprints or malprints because they're imprinted on the wrong thing. They, out of nowhere, may have this sudden aggressive attack, which isn't terrible. It's just unpredicted. I wanted to get this other picture of one of the vultures who I work with is very good. He suddenly came down and had this sudden attack. I couldn't get the camera out and I really don't want to reinforce this, but he wasn't really attacking and wing slapping or biting. He was just sort of lowering his head down and sort of body bumping. It was a little unusual and almost seemed amorous. Wasn't entirely aggressive, but malprints can be a little bit tricky. And if you notice on my hip, I have a little pouch there that's my feed bag with some hemostats to be able to transfer the food up to Mr. Gauch there. So why do we empower ambassadors? Well, ethically, an individual's welfare is improved. Their happiness. Happy animals are healthier animals. Functionally, happier animals are more reliable, better engaging ambassadors. And when you're living in captivity, you've lost of choice. You want to return some of that choice and regain a voice. You want to create a partnership. And this can really improve their world. When they feel comfortable, their home becomes a safe space, an interactive area that where they're in control of, and they can invite you. And if anything unexpected happens, or unintended or something fearful, they may develop better resilience to being disturbed, which is really important for their well-being. So you want to have happy ambassadors that feel like they are in control, because when you lose your control, it doesn't feel good. And resilience would give you greater tolerance to human proximity, and that's important for ambassadors. So we have subtle communication and understanding behavior. And this is sort of important, if you want to understand the natural species, natural history, but you also have to be kind of a sensitive observer of the behavior. Hawks act differently than owls. Large raptors work differently than small raptors. So you need to be able to recognize your comfort and distress. And it's not always exactly the same in every situation. There could be two different outcomes. You think of the way you smile or the way you say hi, and there are multiple ways you communicate the same thing, but they're meaning different things in different contexts. And behavior for a bird can be covert. It's happening on the inside. Think of owls. You have no idea what they're thinking because you can't see it. They're not really showing you it. Or they could be upset, or they could be really happy. You just don't know. Their beak is closed. Or it could be an overt, visible expression that you can do something with. When you see something happen, then you can begin to try to shape it in a direction that you want to have it go in. So if we're going to look at a few different owls, the owl on the left, barred owl, is a little bit upset. Its head sort of fluffed up. Its eyes are wide. It is the wing is drooping down on the perch in kind of a threat defensive display. And you can see its talons. Now the talons aren't totally tight on the perch. It's a little counterintuitive, but when an owl gets upset, he's actually going to grip the perch tighter, and he's going to pull his primaries in really close to his body, almost preparing for an explosion or an impact. So he's becomes very tight. So this is a semi-alert alarmed owl. The one in the middle looks very calm, but actually it's the reverse. The eyes are very tight into slits. He's trying to disappear a little bit. The head is shrunken down. You can see the beak is yellow, so both birds have yellow beaks, so they're young birds. But he's looking at you, and he feels somewhat safe where he is, but he would prefer if you took your eyes off him, let him blend in and disappear. The owl up in the corner is not looking at the person who's taking a picture of him. He looks very fluffy. His eyes are kind of almond-shaped, and he's totally focused on what he's curious about. So it's probably a mouse or a fish or something. Could be even a bug on the ground. In one of the enclosures, Napoleon was staring at the ground one day, and I looked at it, and after a couple seconds, a beetle crawled out. They eat beetles. So this was stimulus for him. The saw-whets are very beautiful, but kind of notorious because they look so still and tame. And the one on the left is being banded. And you can see how when the owl gets very nervous, the muscles around the face will contract and pull back, exposing the eye, and you get this round eye. It also pulls the feather tufts, whereas saw-whets don't have feather tufts. You can actually see a ridge there. So he's so nervous, he's pulling his feathers and facial disc down, and he looks a little tough. The beak a little more exposed. You can see the V shape on the eyebrow feathering between the eyes. The second owl, you might say, is comfortable, but he's also very nervous. While he's up in the tree and blending in, trying to disappear, he's trying to disappear. He's kind of pulled his wing in a little bit, and he's dropped his eyes down just a little bit to try to hide where he's at. Compared to the third owl sitting out on a branch in the sun, this photograph came from a sanctuary. So the bird is worked with, he's exposed to everything, and he should be very nervous for something that might come along to mob him, attack him, or kill him. And yet he has a nice fluffy round hood. The beak, the feathers, bristle feathers are covering the beak. Eyes are kind of dropped down a little bit, not wide and round. So he's actually unnaturally in the wrong spot, the most comfortable. And now we can see a whole bunch of different eyes on saw-whet owls. And so there's a lot of different expression. The pupils can dilate or they can shrink to a pinpoint independently. So when you're looking at an owl and the eyes are really large, that's a nervous owl. Reverse, if the eyes shrink down to a pinpoint, that's another nervous owl. Okay, what happens if it winks at you? Nervous owl. He gets so scared he becomes still and freezes, and if he can't go anywhere, he'll start winking. And if both eyes start winking and blinking, we're in trouble. This bird is terrified and thinks it's about ready to die. Unfortunately, there was a person who came through this summer and saw the saw-whet owl in the sanctuary, Felina, and she got nervous and she jumped down, and the eyes started winking and blinking. And the person naturally thought, this is a beautiful owl. She loves me. She's enticing me by her winks. Well, that might be what we do, but we need to understand how they behave and how their behavior is revealing, trying to communicate distress. So I just asked her, take your eyes off her, turn the other direction, turn your back to her. She'll feel comfortable. Give her 5 seconds, she's going to climb back up to her perch. And that's exactly what happened. Great horned owls, the one on the left looks really calm, comfortable, fluffy, tufts are down, beak is covered up by the bristle feathers. The one in the middle looks like he's sleeping, but the tufts are up, and owls may sleep or they may relax in the day just to avoid being mobbed by other animals. But this owl is not sleeping. The splits are this owl might actually be possibly nesting and nervous about someone being so close. And the third owl obviously does not look happy. Eyes are big, tufts are up, belly is shaking. It won't attack you. It would probably fly away, but it definitely is trying to discourage you from coming any closer. And it's not looking directly at the camera. So there might be 2 people there. So no one likes to be outnumbered. Science of applied behavioral analysis. This is operant conditioning, a behavior change technology. So it requires keen observation. You want to monitor response times when you are engaging with an ambassador to shape through little approximations. You just don't walk up to an owl and put out your hand and expect him to hop on there. You have to earn his trust and have him accept your proximity. So everything is contingent and contiguous. It's dependent upon your proximity, and that may be not very close initially. It's all about gaining their trust and getting them to be active partners. So, desired behaviors that we would be looking for a bird on the glove or on display is comfort in your presence, to be able to step up onto the glove, target training them to do different perches or to the scale, which is really important. Being able to be on the glove and walk around. The minute they start moving and they're not making the movement, but you are, it can be a little upsetting. Being able to go into a crate and being comfortable before people. These are all things that the owl or a hawk would not naturally want to ever do. So you have to develop this. And behavior kind of shrinks down into the ABCs. Behavior never happens in a vacuum. The pair of shoes that are over in the corner didn't end up there accidentally. Something got them to the corner. Whether you walked into the bedroom and threw the shoes in the corner, you walked in and took them off and left them there, there's a reason why they ended up in the corner. So if you take behavior, you can break it down into the smallest units. You have the environment, which is the antecedent, the stage of a behavior that's going to happen. You have the behavior. This is what is going to be done, or what the bird does, and that's the action. And then you have the environment, the consequence. This is the reward, which is the most important because it creates this feedback loop to tell the bird, is this important? Should I do this again? Was this worth doing? And anytime a bird can hear you, you're part of the antecedent. So at Birdsacre, if you drive into the parking lot, the minute you get out of the car, you're part of their world and you're already sort of impacting them. This researcher had visited and he noted how birds have long memories. He's banding some birds down the Galapagos, and you walk into a crowd of birds, and the ones that walk away from you have already been banded because they've had a bad experience and they know to walk away. The ones that don't are the ones that you need to go and band. So wild creatures have an innate fear response, which is just a natural, important survival skill. But when you have behaviors, you can easily start stacking them up in a positive or negative fashion. So you want to be careful of how you stack up those behaviors. Red light behaviors. This is when we need to stop. And you can see Mr. Boris here with one eye looking at you. He has 2 eyes. But when he first arrived here, He was a little nervous. He had a long flight from Michigan, so he was completely discombobulated. And, over time, when people would walk up to him, if someone was wearing, particularly a man, was wearing a baseball cap, he focused on the baseball cap more than anyone else in the crowd. Something happened to him at some point with a person with a baseball cap. And it just makes sense that if you see something bad happen, you start to generalize it. People with baseball caps could be scary. People in a Ford truck could be scary. People in a raincoat. So there are all these little cues to them, which are an antecedent, that they're trying to get information out of. So you want to disassociate that. So if he leans or moves away, opens his wings up, clicks his beak or hisses, puffs out his body feathers, raises the hackles on his back. You can kind of see those back there. And he doesn't do this anymore. He looks around in a darting manner. He vocalizes. These are things where you just freeze and you make him feel comfortable, reduce the threat in his eyes. We noticed that when we kind of closed off his walkway in front of his house, he immediately seemed to feel more comfortable, trying to build up for that resilience. Ladyhawk here is looking back at you, but sometimes she'll be up close to the front of the enclosure, and other times she'll be further back, and she has a choice to move, either stay where she is or move back away from you. But you can continue to move around her if she's perched. Her wings are tucked like that. Sometimes she'll do a little wing tuck, stretch it out and pull it back in, and that is a expression of comfort. She might also do a foot tuck, stand on one foot, and this is like crossing your legs. I'm so comfortable, I can take one foot up and I'm not going to fly because I have to drop that foot to move. She looks around slowly and calmly. She's quiet. And we don't approach her. We always kind of turn sideways and walk around. If you want to make a bird comfortable, you can almost turn back to them, and then they realize you're not going to be approaching them backwards. You can even move backwards and you're not as threatening as if you were moving forwards. And that's just innate in their mind, and how we would be able to catch something or not. But we don't approach the bird when it's comfortable where it's at. This is a photograph of young Napoleon, the barred owl, when he first came after being hit by a car, and yellow beak. And he doesn't look very comfortable. He had just come in. He was very confused about where he was at. And we were able to, when we brought him down and isolated him in another room for training, turned into a different kind of owl. Owls like sun. So he's sunbathing. He's preening his feathers, and the owls will spend probably a good portion of every hour while they're moving around or if they're active, preening their feathers constantly. And I love the little feather on his beak where he's just pulling and cleaning his body, cleaning all the feathers, combing them, and putting a little bit of preen oil on there. But noticeably different owl compared to the first picture. You can still sort of see the wing droop as well, but the feet are nice and calm on the perch, opened up. So what's in it for me? Reasons to engage, and you need to create motivation. Well, what does a bird want? Many things. It wants food, water, shelter, warmth when it's cold. Even though red tails are very tough, they may like to have a little bit of heat, or the option to be able to warm up when it's 0 degrees out. And some of the great horned owls, would rip off the plastic, and to have that opening to the cold winter air, and their bristle feathers on their beak would actually freeze up. But that's what they want, what they're used to. But we had this old red-tailed hawk that was 22 years old, and it would go over to its little light bulb and kind of wiggle its tail over it and purr pleasantly. So it really appreciated that warmth being older. In captivity, with all control taken away, they don't have a choice of their food. We give it to them. We choose. Personal space is sort of defined. They can't, so we want to give them places to go hide or be able to step back from a situation, privacy, novelty. I want to see something new today, and the ability to exhibit their natural behaviors and play. But engagement earns rewards and fulfillment. Who wouldn't want to earn a reward? And when you earn a reward, wouldn't you want to earn another one? So you can develop this behavior. So we arranged the enclosures from what they used to look like, or we're in the process of doing this to arrange the environmental antecedent. When you walk into a room, the stage is set there. And we used to design all the enclosures for the birds to be away from us as far as possible, to have privacy and space. But it's hard for him to come down and approach. So we changed this and dropped them all down lower to about shoulder height. So if the bird was to approach you, you can put your arm down and the bird can easily step up. But we also wanted to make it easy, make the right things easy and the wrong things hard. And that works for us too. You can train yourself to do the things you want to do if you just make it easy for bird to do those things you want to do. So now the bird can fly easily back and forth between the two green perches. We've given a perch in the back, and I can walk in, and I don't approach his hutch, I don't approach where he's at, but I drop the piece of food on the middle of the perch. And I give him a window of opportunity of about 5 minutes. In 5 minutes, if you haven't touched that mouse, I'm going to take it away. And you've lost your opportunity, as you would in the wild. Now, I repeat this a couple of times throughout the day, maybe 5 times. And now he has experience, and he can anticipate. And he chooses to come. And I may have to stand on the other side of the room, facing away. But eventually, through repetition, I can turn a little slightly. I can never face him. I can't look him in the eyes. I need to scan the room to see where he's at, because I don't want him to fly at me. I want to know exactly what he's doing so I can keep him safe and myself safe. But I can look at his feet, and that gives me a whole peripheral. I use my peripheral vision, and I know where he's at. And then I'm able to, by degrees, move a little closer. And the other day, it was kind of cool. So you go in, you drop the food, bird approaches, and you're slowly decreasing the space through these repetitions. And after the bird approaches, you go over down the perch, maybe to that little platform, and you drop a reward. It's still food, but it's bigger. And then you back up, and that's another reward, giving more space. And so the bird comes down, and we repeat this. We got a little rhythm. I'm trying to get you to trust me. And I drop it again, and you get another piece. And then she went back and sat, waiting for another one. A complete, voluntary. You get these little steps. Here's some more before us. This is in a large enclosure where Gauch is. It used to be a great horned owl house, and busy. Now it's clean, easily to be able to move around from perch to perch. And in a smaller space, maybe for a non-flighted bird, you can walk down the perch and go towards the right where there's a food drop platform, or move back, and eventually you can move it over towards the middle perch, and you decrease space for them to feel comfortable. So you want to observe the bird bubble. At first, very large for the bird, and you want to try to make it smaller. For saw-whet owls, you want to freeze. If they get scared, they're not going to eat. They would prefer to starve than to put themselves in danger. And this can be very bad because they really need to have every ounce of food that they get. So you want to freeze until she feels comfortable. And when she gives you a more positive behavior, the eyes maybe shrink a little bit, she takes her eyes off you, then you can move and retreat. You don't approach, you back up, and you're reinforcing her comfort. So we train to scale. If we want to know how to weigh, so we put a little food on the scale, she comes down, we can see what the weight is, and she goes back up. This little hutch area has some nice camouflage, so she can feel comfortable behind. And this works for us too, that in the top picture, we're walking along, we make a big disturbance, all we hear is the green, and we miss everything else. So when you're moving through in a sanctuary or the woods, you want to pay attention to the green in the bottom and have your awareness be larger than the disturbance. And you want to put trust into the bank account. There's a nice little foot tuck. These birds, we have an anthropocentric view of the world. Owls are feathery people. They may mate and they may raise families like we do, but they have different views of the world. And so you need to let their natural behaviors be and exist, and sort of respect them as they are, and not try to put ideas into them. We often would label. We do this naturally. A bird, behavior is not what a bird does. Behavior is what a bird does, not what an animal is. So when we label something, we cover the action and we give it a description on top. And you're not really seeing the behavior, like crazy owl, mean goose. I mean, is a goose really mean, or is it being scared and threatened so it acts in a certain way? So how do we empower? Through choice, the freedom to act or not. When trainers give animals the power to leave, the animals are more likely to stay. So stepping down off the glove actually reinforces stepping back up by having this freedom. And it allows the bird to be an active participant. So with the antecedent, the ABCs, it's in our nature to change what we do based on what we're doing. When a handler lowers his glove, if the bird steps up, then the bird receives a treat. Will it do it again? Every moment's a learning and teaching opportunity. And it's really interesting that when you walk into the enclosure, that's a training you're teaching every moment. So Gauch here was learning to step up for treats. And I'm trying to teach him to spread his wings now. And when he spreads his wings at the right moment, I will click to tell him he's done the right thing. Ziggy down below, I'm cueing him to a lure. So I've got a little food, that's my lure. And I tap on the stump, that's the cue to come. And he's looking at the food, beautiful picture of him flying in. Not at me, and he's not going to land on my head, although he's done it a few times because he's also an imprint. But now you can see him, you want to feed the beak, not the feet. And this is another example, and I'm giving him a spread wings so that, I hold my hand up and I spread my fingers, and then he will open them up, and if I give him a bigger piece, he'll open up and have a wider spread. So the bigger the food, the more you earn. Pictures of Gauch going into the crate and the freedom to come out, has him go back in, and it's important. The crate is good if we need to move him or have a medical things we need to perform. Here's a bird saying no, maybe, and then yes, I want to participate, and she flies over to her perch and lands. This is Napoleon and other ways to engage her to provide enrichment. And so we often wondered, what was happening here with this piece of rope? It was always getting untangled. Well, when no one was around, he flew down and would take it all over the enclosures. Some of the other vultures, I found I can work with as well to draw them to me with food, to desensitize them and gain their trust. But they're always watching your eyes, even if your eyes wiggle. And so you can provide these little things of enrichment for them to try to hunt for food. And natural behavior, Gauch having his natural behavior, rubbing on his beak on the stump, loves this little Kong in the pile of leaves, foraging for food, going into the cleaning bucket. Owls, at nighttime, I'm infecting this room with positive vibrations, allowing them to come in. I want to have one owl come in so I can start working with them on window of opportunity. But instead of going to take one and physically bring it in, I allow them to choose to come in. And then you can see one getting a little mouse, and he's eating the mouse, and now they're feeling very comfortable here. When no one's around, they start moving all over the place, and the world of their own. And so privacy is very important to them. You never get to see them really come over and eat. And I use a game camera to catch this. And when they go to eat, they actually close their eyes because they're too close to the mouse, and their binocular vision is so powerful they can't see the food. So he comes and takes his food and runs off. And I'm trying to have him reduce his time and back him up from the time he'd normally eat to eat earlier, so that I can work with him earlier in the day rather than late at night. So how do we appear to them? Well, how can we make them feel a little more comfortable? When people walk up to the enclosure, don't stare at them head on. Turn sideways. Try not to stare. Try not to point. That's not polite. Even cameras can look a little scary to them, but they can tolerate a lot because they've already, they live here and they're comfortable. but there are ways that we could, behave and be a little more quiet and respectful, especially out in the field. Don't mob an owl if you see it. Give it a little space, turn sideways, take your eyes down, pull up your camera to get a photograph. But let the bird tell you if it's comfortable with where you're at. Don't climb over the wall. I see lots of people climbing over the wall, and sometimes, they're just so excited to see something, they get a little too close, and that doesn't make for a happy owl. This here is Atticus, and he has this rare owl bow behavior where he allows me, doesn't have to scratch his head so I can approach him, and he will just sit there and I can scratch his head until he gets so relaxed he might even fall over because his feet get very loose and calm, and he just loves this. You might be able to scratch another owl's head if you gain their trust, but each one is a little personality of its own, and so you're creating comfort for them to tolerate our presence and educate us and inspire us to be better for their world and ours. So this is a thank you for for joining in with a short pictorial of Birdsacre and behaviors. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much, Grayson. Wow, I just learned so much, as I'm sure everyone else did as well. That was absolutely wonderful. If participants have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box, and we will ask Grayson for you. And if, as Jake said before, if you would like to raise your little blue virtual hand, I can unmute you so you can ask Grayson yourself. While we're waiting for questions to come in, Grayson, I have a question. And maybe this was implied, but did your grandfather work for Birdsacre?
Yes, he started the sanctuary as a memorial to Cordy, but his reputation and love of birds caused people to start bringing in injured birds to the sanctuary. And those that he couldn't release, some were really good ambassadors. So Buttons and Ollie were the two always around him.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That was really special.
Yeah, it's a neat history going back, but looking back at the so Gauch and Ziggy are imprinted vultures, which are very interactive, and then you look at the two wild ones, which don't approach you and back up, and they you realize through the imprints, the ambassadors, that these are wonderful species. And then I turned around and thought, well, the other guys are pretty cool too, right? They're wells of personality. Mm-hmm. And so you can engage something and really, when it starts to express itself, it will, open up new ways of behaving with you.
Absolutely.
Grayson, we do have a question for you. Cheryl was wondering how many more birds could the property support? Maybe Cheryl knows of a bird that can use a home.
Well, usually everything should go back to the wild. That's the goal. You don't want anything in here that shouldn't be here. If you're non-releasable, our permit only allows us to have 4 individuals of each species. And each bird has to be a vital member. And I'm starting to discover that when you start engaging, like you're spending your whole time almost like children or friends that you're interacting with. So they require a lot of time if you want to give them the best life. And of course, finances also mean that allow you how much you can do for them. So in the past, we've accepted those that were around and in need of a home. And now I'm trying to be a little more thoughtful about the family fit and the message we're working with. Certainly there are interesting ones out there, and everybody's different. So in a loose way, we're very happy with where we're at, but certainly there are others that I'd be interested in. And there is a wider net out there for educational birds.
Thank you, Grayson. We have some more questions in the chat box and some people saying, thank you so much. I learned a lot and look forward to sharing what I learned. The next question that has popped up, let's see, I'm going to try and go in order. What kinds of parents are the adults to the owlets?
Well, owl parents are the best parents for owlets. They're loving. They have these, you think of owls hooting, but they actually have little chitters and whistles and whispers, and the babies have begging calls to encourage you to feed me. So the parents can be very gentle, and they use their beak. I noticed using my hemostat to deliver food. I also kind of clean it off like a beak when they feed their beak on, a log. But they also, so this beak is actually a very gentle, almost like a hand, and it, like they can play and preen and touch. They're wonderful parents to their babies, and they teach them the right thing to do and how to behave. People will never replace that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But in certain situations, you can't get away from an orphan, and then you just try to get it back to the wild. And there's this little window, and it can just happen. And the bird looks one day, and it sees, and it thinks it's a person.
Mm.
And it's impossible to undo once it's occurred.
That was a really good question, because so many different animals interact. So, with their offspring, they have such different types of relationships. So that was a great question. We have another couple for you, Grayson. Susan was wondering how many people handle and work with each owl, and do you also need volunteers?
We do. We're sort of reassessing with the program right now. And of course, today's world, everything's been very quiet. So we're backing up a little bit, but certain birds may not want to, they may have preferences. So they may not want to work with me, or they may want to work with me. And you kind of have to explore that a little bit, but it's a very slow process of gaining trust. And my hope is that we can build all these birds to become resilient and engage. But some birds may not want to be on the glove, and that's totally fine to be a display bird. But they still need some sort of engagement, bringing them enrichment toys. Those paper towel rolls where they can ferret out the mouse inside and rip it apart, and they're taking care of their home is one of the biggest things. Not as exciting, but when they have a nice space that's safe, that's the most important thing. But if you'd like to email birdsacre@hotmail.com with your interest to volunteer, perhaps winter's a hibernating season, but perhaps in the future we can connect and talk.
Awesome. Day is wondering, what's the story of the vultures and how you got them?
A couple of years ago, we hadn't had a lot of vultures, and suddenly we had couple vultures come through independently. They seem to be, coming up here more and more. And I wonder sometimes, if they get their food on the side of the road, which is a horrible thing, because, they can get hit by a car. Perhaps, they should be off, looking for food in the fields or in the woods. I wonder if the increase in tourists has caused the increase in vultures. But, with the warming trends, we're all heading north and enjoying the summer. I saw a vulture last March in a snowstorm, and our two imprints were both transfers from New Jersey from the Raptor Trust, and they had I think Ziggy had kind of bounced around a little bit because he had this aggressive personality. That's a label. He didn't have an aggressive personality. He was acting, he was approaching you the way you didn't want. He was maybe biting, maybe wing slapping. He's harmless, but it's just amazing to redirect that. Don't think about what you don't want them to do. Think about what you want them to do and direct them. So it's, even when he has this sort of a amorous, overactive look in his eye, when I walk in, I can redirect that and cue him to the stump and give him something to do. He wants to engage. And when he engages, he gets, you can see his self-fulfillment.
Yeah.
So it's looking at the birds in an entirely different way. But you can't rush this either. It's a very slow process.
That's a great answer, Grayson. We had a question from Kate, and she was asking about, what's the best procedure if you come across an injured bird, owl, or hawk Who should we call? Is there any way to protect them until help arrives? And is there a safe way to transport them?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Depends on your locality, geographically. If you're, the first thing you could probably do is, just look at the main wildlife rehabilitator page. And that would give you a list of all the rehabilitators in Maine and, which ones do what, whether it's mammals or it's birds. Some are small facilities, others are big. One of the best facilities, two great ones, Acadia Wildlife in Town Hill is a wonderful resource to try. Also, Avian Haven is a wonderful resource for birds. We're able to accept birds as well, but we're very limited, and especially this year, it's just been a hard year because you lose your volunteers because of the situation, and then you become overwhelmed. Maybe you're home more, and you find wildlife that's naturally getting into trouble out there. So it's been a big year for the rehabilitation facilities, but to be able to protect them, as long as they're not in if it's a raptor, you want to be very careful. Talons are sharp. You could get hurt. So first contact a rehabilitator to get the advice for the specific creature in need. For orphans, you generally kind of want to put them either back in the nest or see in the bushes to see if the parents are going to return in the area within 15 to 30 minutes if you're not in their immediate space and scaring them away. You want to keep the babies with the parents as best as possible. But so there are a couple of steps. Calling a rehabilitator is the best thing to get your direct advice. And transporting a towel, gloves, little cardboard box. Be very careful about. You probably shouldn't provide any sort of food or water because you don't know the situation. If something is starving, you can hurt it by feeding it because it's a slow process to bring it back. You want to keep up the electrolytes and bring the calories on without providing too much food because that can cause the system to go into shock.
Wow, I've learned so much, and not just about owls. I feel like just about like animals and care for them and training in general. Thank you so much. Lander, do we have anybody raising their hands in line?
Not that I have seen so far. I can do one more check.
Well, we've got a couple minutes left, so maybe if anybody wants to raise their hand now would be the time to do it, right?
Now's the time, or put your last minute questions in the chat box. Thank you all for asking your questions and engaging. Really, really great questions.
And Grayson, I have one question while we wait. We've got like 5 minutes left or so. You talked a lot about the owls specifically being social with each other. Are the birds at Birdsacre, are they ever social, like interspecies? Like, do owls ever interact with the vultures, or is that just not happen at all?
Well, that's an interesting question. You want to be careful who you mix with another species. So basically, one species should be in its own enclosure because big raptors could hurt small raptors. So there is actually a checklist on which species can interact or tolerate each other, but they kind of stay apart, and we keep them basically separated. Even individuals may become territorial in spaces, so you got to watch who you put in, who's your roommate. Although one year we had some vultures, I think we were the 2 wild vultures who were not imprints, and they were on one side of an enclosure separated to another room. The door opened up one day and this shy little vulture ran over to see what was going on into the great horned owl house. It got up onto this perch with a platform with our matriarch, Her Majesty, who doesn't tolerate other owls being too close to her, usually during the day. And the vulture got up on the platform with Her Majesty and started pushing her tail feathers because she was nervous now in this new space, wondering, how do I get back to my room? And her tail feathers would be batting the owl's face back and forth, wiping it. And the owl just sat there very calmly, didn't do anything, didn't hiss, didn't click her beak, didn't put her feather tufts up, just sat there and got feather dusted. And eventually the vulture hopped down and ran back to, its side. What a strange interaction, because you have this harmless bird and this other bird who was very powerful. And they did great.
That's a great story. Thanks so much for sharing, Grayson. We do have a couple more questions in the chat box. Do you raise the mice yourself, or where do you get them?
We do not raise, it's a very expensive operation, and there are facilities out there that you can purchase mice, Rodent Pro and these other operations. And at $2 a mouse, it becomes a very expensive endeavor when you think of that one great horn might eat 4 or like 80 grams of mice every day. So then times 365, the money can really explode. So, but you want to be very careful where the food comes from, and we can't accept donations because we don't know that history of that animal, what it might have gone into. And, one of the big things out there is poison. Residential poison you can buy in the store, one little pellet can infect, a creature, and usually you put out the whole bag so that, the creature eats a whole bunch, becomes toxic. It goes out there and infects the food chain. And that's catastrophic to a lot of raptors. The better thing is a little snap trap. Glue traps are terrifying. There's nothing worse than seeing a chickadee rolling around in a glue trap, or a mouse. It's not a humane, quick ending. But they have certain things that they prefer, and the vultures sometimes like fish. Gauch is a shrimp man, but he might like a little bit of salmon that's going bad. And just because they eat things that are rotting doesn't mean that they don't want to eat something nice and fresh and yummy. It's just that they usually don't get that chance. So he has preferences, and he's become kind of a little king in his world.
That's so connected, the food chain and everything. And I think we, as a people, forget that those little acts like setting glue traps and things, they do have effects. So thanks for that, Grayson. It's important to stay mindful, especially we're all so lucky to live. Lander and I'll speak for us. We're so lucky to live in nature and close to that. So thanks. You have a lot of praise in the chat box. I want you to know that. And there was a question from Cheryl. She visits Birdacre a lot, and she was wondering about the your land heading towards the Whitcomb Woods, which I'm not myself familiar with, but she says it's very beautiful for birding. And if there's any plan for trails maybe, or if people are welcome to go birding within that space.
Yes, I would advise trying to stay on the trails just so you can keep orientation. There is a new trail section on the property that is by Whitcomb Woods and kind of running down the length of the property to the Bayside Road in the Frenchman Bay, Jordan Preserve. And so there's a new trail system that's starting to open up, but wonderful place to bird. It's amazing the things you can see here. As with all the properties that are open to the public, we are lucky. And so get out there and enjoy them all season.
Thank you so much, Grayson. Again, more praise in the chat box. And then a sweet story from Anne. She said, funny story, as a child, my granny had an outhouse. An owl loved to perch by it and hoot at passersby. Scared me many times in the dark. Thank you, Anne, for that story. I know we're right at 5 p.m. And we're just getting more praise in the chat box. If you can't see it, Grayson, just everyone thanking you so much for the presentation and what a beautiful slideshow it was. So yes, thank you again for joining us this evening. And I will send out a follow-up email with the recording, and maybe I'll put in the Birdsacre email if you want to get in touch about volunteering, and anything else I think of that might be interesting.
Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you. Really appreciate the opportunity to be a part of a great series. It's great what you're doing.
Thanks, Grayson. It was our pleasure.
One last thing, Grayson. Susan says, "Thank you, Grayson. Your grandpa would be so proud." I just wanted to make sure you heard that comment.
Oh, thank you very much, Susan.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful night.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.